Yeah. So what are we doing today, Joel? What's the point of this podcast?
There is no point.
There ever?
It's very existential.
I like it.
It's great.
Let's tell the people, the guests. The people in the audience say they can hear us. I'll just start. Our guests today are two people that work for the company, so this is kind of an insider podcast. We have Robert Cartaino, who's the head of the community team.
Hello.
Live from Melbourne, Florida. Is that right, Melbourne?
I'm actually in Palm Bay, but most people know Melbourne.
Okay. Let's just call it Melbourne.
Okay.
And from St. Louis, Rebecca Chern.
Hello,
Which
Chernoff.
is sort of Chernoff, our Chern, Rebecca
Yes.
Chernoff. I'm sorry.
Exactly.
I like to think of you as our Chem because the kerning is very bad in the fonts that I use.
Lovely.
It's called chemming, when the kerning isn't right. So,
Mm-hmm.
That was last week's joke. I don't think I'll try to use it. And some of you may know Jeff Atwood from his vacation abode in El Cerrito, California.
That's right. So I wanted to start with the topic, Joel.
Sure, go ahead.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I don't want to be too aggressive, but I do have a topic that I would like to discuss.
Yeah, that was the point of this podcast, is to discuss some community-oriented topics.
I see. That was the point, right. Okay, so one thing that comes up a lot, and actually came up on the Moot podcast, which I thought was excellent. Hopefully it was. People enjoyed that one. I enjoyed that one a lot. Was that he brought up that one of the dangers of having communities that sort of you have to make go away is the people in the community get attached to the community, even if it isn't very big. And at the end of that period, there's sort of a lot of resistance because they've been around so long. And I think we've had a number of communities that they're not doing badly, right? Like if you go to stackexchange.com sites, and like Joel said, you scroll down to the bottom of that list. These are not bad communities.
No.
I mean, because we have a policy like if it's bad, if it's not working, we'll make it go away, right? Because it has to. But the question is, like, what do you do when these go on for a very long time, but they're not really getting good traction? I was just curious.
Yeah. Well,
I thought we should have a discussion with them.
That's a good discussion. I have a whole bunch of things to suggest. One is I want to tell a random old Shaggy Dog story, which is the Joel on Software forums, which some of the people from the Joel on Software forums were early people into Stack Overflow, and they were a little bit of a progenitor. Is that a word, progenitor?
Yeah, it is.
Hey, the people in the chat room say they can't hear me. Am I cutting out?
You're cutting out a lot to me,
yes, you
too.
are.
I'm way squelched, Mr. Alex. I will stick close to the microphone for a moment. No, it's still cutting me out.
It's weird.
All right. The Joel on Software forums. Yeah, that's because I'm talking right into the mic.
No, you'll be fine either way.
All right. The original Joel on Software forums, we had just the Joel on Software forum, and then we added a couple more topics. I think there was one that was supposed to be .NET questions. There was one that was business of software. That was very successful. There was one called design of software, which flopped. And we had a very, very strict rule. Nothing off topic was allowed. And among other things, what we considered to be off-topic was discussing the forums themselves, because it was just some crappy Usenet clone software that I wrote, and it was really, really basic, just as a way of letting people talk to one another. And it had a lot of design decisions in its basicness, but it was basic. And what would happen is that every single person would come onto those forums and be like, hey, I like these forums. Hey, by the way, I got a suggestion. You should move the yes button over here and the no button over there and the cancel button, and there should be a way to edit your posts and blah, 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 blah. And although that content was maybe interesting, it was super repetitive because every new person would feel like, oh, we haven't talked about how this software should be better that we are using right now. And it was off topic because it wasn't anything about, the business of software, for example, if you were on the business of software forum. So we would just ban that stuff and delete it right away and point people to the FAQ. And over time, there existed a group of people that really wanted to sort of chat amongst themselves and wanted to kind of be friends. And they sort of somehow persuaded me, I don't know how this happened, to create a new discussion group called Off Topic. It was the Joel on Software Off Topic discussion group. Oh, this is going to be fun. I'm going to do something fun in this podcast. And so the Joel on Software Off Topic discussion group was where all those people went and chatted amongst themselves about whatever the hell they wanted. And it was very freewheeling and open and 4chan-y, and there was a lot of stuff that you wouldn't necessarily want your family to read by mistake. But it was hard to find the Off Topic forum. It was a little bit buried. I had to keep people from finding it. So at one point, bad things happened, and I won't go into what they are. And we decided that it was like a literal liability to us to keep the off-topic forum open. And so we closed it down and we said, go away. There will be no more off-topic forum. And there had been a group of people, probably 10 really strong people, maybe 30 relatively active people, who were spending hours on the off-topic forum, who were really pissed off when we shut it down. And they built a clone of the crappy Joel and Software Discussion forum software.
There was a clone of Usenet.
Which was a clone of Usenet. Well, Usenet was, web-based, but yeah. And those people are still, this was like, I don't know, 50 years ago, and those people still have their clone running, and the same community with the same human beings are still there talking. Their website is crazyontap.com. And it's just don't go there because it's like not, it's, crazy. It is crazy on tap. It is literally crazy on tap. But I'm looking there right now, and actually some of the people are new. I don't recognize, but some of the people I do recognize from the original Joel and Software forums, and they're still pretty friggin' active. Let's see when the last post was, December 7th. Well, that's today, so they're still going strong, having been kind of ripped out of our system because we couldn't bear the thought of it.
Is that really relevant, though? Because that's like all off topic.
How is that relevant?
That's like
true, but
really...
I mean, it says something about the stability of communities, right? Like the communities will cling to life no matter what, and they will be they'll be angry if you try to say, just because you built a Hangout for the kids, and the kids are hanging out in the Hangout, and then you close down the Hangout, that group of kids are now socially connected, and they don't want to go away. They will resist.
Well, Robert, did you have any thoughts on this? Because I think we are getting up on, and again, these communities are not doing poorly. I don't want to call any of these communities out because if they really sucked, we would terminate them. Really, they're not doing anything wrong.
Right.
But
Well,
it does raise the question of if they don't sort of get traction, like they don't sort of take off, like.
Yeah, I mean, we identify sites that that are either duplicating content or they're somehow hurting the internet or harming the name brand or something like that. And we have our share of those shut down ones. The conundrum we run into is where it's just something isn't quite right about the site. We just didn't get the scope right, or they produced some decent content, but we just sort of know they're just never going to go anywhere. So do you close them down because you sort of don't want to keep leading them by the nose, or do you just sort of let them exist, like in the context that they're pretty much harmless. They're not hurting anyone. It provides some value to those few users, and the content always exists on the internet. So it's really hard to decide at what point do you just archive it and make it available to the few people who will hunt that down, and when is it something you could just sort of put on the back shelf as a legacy value, but no real future for it. I don't. It's a really hard problem because if you do look at the bottom, the bottom of our traffic listings, it's like, boy, they work really hard at it. How far do we want to lead them along until we just sort of, it's a tough love kind of thing.
Well, to go back to my analogy of the public park, so we've created these parks that may be nice, but like nobody is going there.
Right.
It's like, well, why does the park exist? The park ultimately exists so that other people can benefit from and enjoy it. To the extent that that's not really happening, maybe those resources should be allocated to other parks. I don't know. I mean, Rebecca, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, I think it's just, it's a matter of how long do we let a community just kind of grow and exist and wait until it hits their tipping point.
I mean, if you think about it, it's a hard problem. Like, what if we just literally just let them exist forever? What does that do to the internet in terms of our, making the internet a better place? Are we really, like, if the site's not being used, are we really sort of using up resources that we could allocate somewhere else?
Yeah, I think
it's a hard call.
I think that's the question, and I don't know. I mean, Joel, did you have any? I don't think we can actually have an answer, but I'm curious what your thoughts are. Because I'm thinking like after a year, there should be some like review point at a year where we decide.
That's an interesting question about using up resources, because there are ways in which a site detracts from the quality of the brand, even if it's not using up resources. So,
can we not say quality of the brand? Because I don't care about that.
Well, so the question is let's say the Google rank. Care about that, PageRank?
Well, it's not making the internet better. Like, nobody's going there, right? Like, who?
There is a way to make the internet worse. If nobody goes somewhere, there is a way to make the internet worse, which is what And this is a far cry from what we're doing on most sites. But take Demand Media, for example, or eHow or one of those companies. Their business model was, let's find things that are being searched for that we can put $7 worth of advertising on and charge $3 to or pay some writer $3 and make $4 on the difference between the $3 we pay some writer and the $7 in advertising we get. And if we do that a billion times, then we got $1 billion business. And my math, I know, is impeccable. Now, what would happen is they would say, all right, there's a lot of people searching for owls. Let's make an awesome site about owls, and the budget is $4. And so they would pay some schmo somewhere $4 to write an article about owls. What would that guy do? He would go to all the owl websites and cut and paste sentences from here and there and put it together in some completely incoherent, totally wildly crappy piece of crap article on a Demand Media site. And then Demand Media would SEO the hell out of that thing. They'd put it on a high-value domain with PageRank and gigantic, ginormous link farms all pointing to that. They would have a custom domain, owls.not or something to everything absolutely literally everything possible to promote that owl page, which is a substantially worse owl page than the one that it displaced, but is nevertheless coming up higher in Google ranking. So when you do that, you break the internet, essentially. I don't think we've ever come close to that, but when we have a low-quality site, there are examples where we have low-quality sites where 40% of the questions are less good than similar questions somewhere else.
Well, let's talk about that. So one thing we do is we have this process where we pick, 10 questions at random?
Yeah.
10 questions, yes.
And we review them and try to figure out, are they better, worse, or roughly the same as what's already on the internet. And I know these are becoming a lot of work for you guys. There was some discussion about how to handle these, so maybe you guys could talk about that, like what that process is, why we do it, what it's for, how you plan to handle it in the future.
Well, we do an ongoing evaluation of sites, and this is a fairly new process because we have so many sites now that we just sort of can't use them organically and make just a sort of off-the-cuff evaluation. So every 60 days, the system sends us 10 questions from the site, a sampling of 10 questions over the last 30 days. And, so we go through them and we match them to what's on the internet and look to decide if they're better, worse, or the same. But as Jeff just mentioned, that it's getting to be a lot of work. And we're now looking at these evaluations and deciding what is it we can do with this information we find. So what we're heading towards now, and we're really just starting this process and we haven't fleshed it out yet, but is doing this evaluation in full view of the community, whether the community does it or we do it and present it to them. And ideally, the community really should be doing these self-evaluations because they're way more qualified to determine if their information is better than what's out there. But ultimately, we want to really turn this into, number one is when you find problems, the community is now aware of the kinds of things they need to work on. And number two is tying it to graduation. Instead of just waiting for a certain quantity of questions or a certain amount of traffic, is saying, we're really looking for when you've surpassed, when you've passed that point where you're making the internet better and not just the same or worse.
Right.
And actually tying that intimately to graduation. So we're struggling with how do we get that sort of work out of the community, and how do we sort of objectively evaluate what they feel about their own content. So that's it.
I think that's a good point. Is first start by just doing it on the meta. Actually asking questions. Start with the question the 60-day evaluation. We pick these 10 questions at random, and then the first answer would be from you, Robert, evaluating each question and your opinions and thoughts on each one. And hopefully this doesn't take too long. When I've done these, it's an hour, 2 hours.
It's hard for us to tell on certain specialized subjects. So I have no way of telling you if the Japanese site questions are any good at all, or if the answers that are there are correct or best or worst.
Well, that's somewhat true for sure. But I think also you can tell, let's forget Japanese because proper English. Is it written in a way that I can understand? Does it, does it have bullet points? Is it coherent? Does it provide references? You don't actually, you can get a surprising amount of currency out of, is this a coherent answer that tells a story?
That gets you to a certain point. But what's interesting, I have often spoken to experts on subjects. I've done it on quantitative finance, on statistics. Some of these have gotten better on linguistics, where I've spoken to somebody who's a deep expert on the subject and said, what do you think about this? And they've said, well, these are baby questions. These are really amateur questions. Like,
but they would also say that about Wikipedia, Joel. I mean, a lot of these guys that are really hardcore.
Sometimes.
I mean, I've had many people tell me they think Wikipedia really sucks. And I mean, it's relative. I mean, I see what you're saying. For sure, I'm not... What you're saying is true, for sure. I mean, it's good to have true experts in these really deep fields come in and look at it.
Yeah.
But I think you can get easily half of the way there because so much of the content on the internet is just really bad. Like, really bad. Like, experts exchange bad, right?
Well,
it doesn't take a genius to look at experts exchange and go, this is a bad experience, right?
Yeah. Well, the experience, sure, yeah.
Well, the whole thing. I mean, the information, the experience, just the basics of it.
But the quality of the information, sometimes sites which look good to us are actually a lot worse than we think. I mean, they have the form of a good site, but if you ask an expert, they say, well, these people don't know what they're talking about. The question doesn't even make sense.
Well, then we shouldn't be asking the community because, therefore, the community has no expertise. So if you put it on the meta, then it's not going to help you because they say, oh, it looks good to us, right?
Yeah, maybe.
So then what's the point of asking the community in that case?
Well, I don't know. Maybe they are... That's a good point. I mean, maybe they at least know that they're not doing so well.
Well, maybe we need a better procedure of what a question evaluation comprises of. It's almost like show us your data sort of thing. You know, do a search and show us the better result or the worst result. It's something a little bit more objective than just saying, you know, is it better, worse, or the same? I don't know how we do that.
We had talked about contacting experts and like paying them an honorarium, basically just to review our content, give them the 10 sample questions. And like you said, Joel, we have to sometimes maybe even reach beyond the community to figure out if it's working because we don't have the experts that we need on some of these sites, perhaps.
Yeah.
So find the expert, pay them the honorarium, do the evaluation, and then basically post that evaluation on the meta. It's like, look, we contacted Joe Schmo, expert in quantitative finance, who's written these 10 books on the topic, and here's what he said.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the way we should be doing this. And we had always been very shying away from this idea of paying people to do stuff on the site. But
well, that's not paying people to do stuff. What we shied away from is paying people to create content for us. But to evaluate sites, I'm happy to pay for that.
It still work, though, because we have to figure out who they are, find them.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that could be a meta question. It's like, who are the experts that should be evaluating this site?
Right.
I mean, that ties into promotion, too, right? These are ultimately the kind of people that you want to be aware that your site exists anyway.
Right.
So maybe that's a good way to approach this. For some of the sites, and I get your point about like quantitative finance I know nothing about, but you know. I
thought it actually looked good, and I showed it to Jared, and he said like nobody he works with, if the people that he works with were to ask these questions, they would be fired. I mean, these are like there's like it's like a sort of a chef not understanding that milk curdles, like that kind of stuff. Really basic.
But I definitely like the idea of involving the community. It's just the paradox of I think you have to reach beyond the community, Robert, and perhaps this.
That sounds, it's an interesting idea. I have to think about that a little bit.
But I definitely like the idea of doing it on the meta. Like, okay, we're contacting this expert. Here's the 10 questions we're sending this person.
Well, our action item at this point is we have backed up so many evaluations that are just piling up on our action board. We're gonna spend the next week or two. It's a little bit of a Wild West approach. Is like let's take these and to get them done before the next 60-day evaluation shows up. Let's bring these to the sites and try different formats and see what works and what doesn't. If we have a bad experiment, there's another one right around the corner. This is an ongoing thing, so we're free to just sort of try things and figure out what works and what doesn't.
Well, this is relevant because we had an email exchange with Matt Cutts, who's very, very helpful, one of the key guys at Google about pretty much all their public-facing search optimization stuff.
Yeah.
And he was contacting us, and he kind of hurt our feelings a little bit because he was saying, "You guys have all these sites," and he likes us. He's not going to say anything mean to us.
Auto mechanics, Judaism, and German.
He's like, you have all these different sites, and it's like you're. From an outside perspective, like from an algorithmic perspective, it might look spammy, and this kind of hurt our feelings because we do so much to make sure that the content is of quality, right? And he doesn't know this, and that's what really bothered me. Is like we don't have enough public presence explaining. Look, here are the links we go to make sure that every site we create is indeed making the internet better in some small way, and definitely not making it worse, right? And there needs to be more public awareness of that. And I think this is an important process to talk about these 60-day evaluations of, and I, again, get the experts, let the community participate. It's like, are we making the internet better or worse? Like, you tell us,
Yeah.
So that would maybe help raise awareness of this as well.
Is it kind of a scary prospect that we could be creating sites that or traditionally create bad content, so we're hurting ourselves by doing it really well?
creating bad content really well.
Because I think part of what Matt was saying is you're getting into realms that are typically, from the content farms.
No, let me be specific about what I think Matt was saying. I think Matt was addressing a very specific question, which is, hey guys, why do you think we had this? There was some. I think it was like why did server fault? We asked him why did server fault traffic go down with a Panda update specifically, and he replied to that. He's sort of looking around at kind of like, what does he think about our site, and how would the Google algorithm respond to that? So he's not issuing a value judgment like this is good or this is bad or you're good or this is bad. He's just saying, all right, I know that the Google quality algorithm does these things, and here's how they might affect you. And what he was saying about the Jewish-German auto mechanic site is that when you have one property that contains 3 widely divergent sites on 3 different topics, that is sniffed by the Google algorithm as a sign that you couldn't be going that deep. In other words, their algorithm prefers the awesome site about owls to demand media.
Can I read what he... I agree with that, but rather than just summarize it, can we just read it?
Sure, do you have it?
I do.
Yeah, awesome.
Matt Cutts, this is Matt Cutts writing us, and again, he meant it in the nicest possible way, but it hurt our feelings a little bit. He said, you've got a network of 70 sites at this point. You've got sites about car repair, Jewish life learning, and German language. That's starting to move into the areas where content farms used to sit. A lot of your sites don't even have their own icons, just letters. In my experience, when people start running networks of 50-plus sites, the effort spent on each site, this is the important part, starts to get spread pretty thin. I think a lot of your sites sit on StackExchange.com, which has built up its own reputation, but serverfault.com isn't like that. So, again, this idea that because we have so many sites, we must be phoning it in on some level, right?
Yeah. Well, we certainly are on the personal productivity site. I know we're phoning that in. I haven't been to that site once.
I have a couple times. I think I did the evaluation on that one. I mean, nothing really bad was happening there, you know.
Well, that's the thing, too. The subject itself may not be...
Nothing bad is happening to there? Go there right now. Productivity.stackexchange.com, Jeff.
Yeah, jeez.
Is there a catch-all system for keeping track of things? Good at writing to-do lists, but
Robert
awful
said,
at doing them.
It's the topic. I mean, some topics are just kind of weak.
Yeah,
you know?
Well, this is...
But what if we have the best personal productivity site on the web? Does that make it valuable, or does that make it, still? I don't want to call it garbage, but you know what I'm saying. It's a bad topic, but a well done bad topic. These are hard problems. Like we're solving somebody's issue. It's like let's just say you really don't like or don't believe in horoscopes, but we have like the best horoscope site on the web. You how do you make that judgment? Are they talking nonsense, or do we have are we solving like millions of people's problems? This might be like a personal productivity problem.
But these aren't. Well, look at the site. Let's go.
On. I did look at the site. I looked at a new answer by a new user, and it's actually pretty good. In fact, I uploaded it because it was good.
Wait, where do I look for new? Okay.
Just anything by user with 1 rep.
Right. Here.
Yeah, just click on a little pro tip. Some people don't know this. If you click on where it says 1 day ago, it'll take you to the latest post. Like I clicked on the one that says 1 day ago, Gail. I just clicked on the word 1D ago.
Oh, that's a link?
Yep.
Oh, my God.
I know. If you only knew how our sites work, it's pretty amazing.
If only our sites had hyperlinks, had used blue text and underlines.
Yeah, I know. But if you underline everything, it's oppressive, right? It's like everything's a giant underline.
Anyway. This stuff that's going on in personal productivity is just conversation. It's like I'm having a productivity problem, and then a bunch of people say, "Oh yeah, I fixed that by drinking a lot of milk." I mean, it's not.
Let's go one higher level up.
Yeah.
I see what you're getting at, and I see what Robert's getting at. It's like we evaluate the topic. Like, does this topic even make sense on our engine? I think what I'm hearing about personal productivity is it's not really wrong. The content's not bad. It's just the topic itself is weak because it's not science, right?
Yes.
Who is doing this, right? Who is measuring this? How do you determine how you can listen to a podcast while you're in... It's just opinions, right? It's not.
Right.
It's conversation and discussion.
Everything in here is subjective.
So Robert and Rebecca, maybe you guys talk. You guys do a ton of work on the Area 51 process, to figure out like what kind of topics are coming up, how they're going to work, and can you talk a little bit about your daily process, Robert? I know you do a lot of stuff on Area 51 before we even get to site stage, right?
Yeah, I mean, Area 51 gets looked at very closely. All the proposals that go through Area 51 get looked at very closely at 2 points. I watch it every day when the newest proposals get proposed, and what you're looking for is blatant type of problems. You want to close duplicates, things that just won't fit on our network, users who just don't get it, that sort of thing. But after that, it's really up to the users to sort of start developing and defining and committing to the proposal. Now, when the proposal sort of starts hitting what we call sort of that point of inevitability,
well, you do something at like 45% as well.
Yes,
so
that's it.
Talk
It's
about
the 40
the commitment percentages that you look at.
Yeah, it's at 45%. We've just figured that's the point where, this proposal someday will launch. So we say if this proposal was going to launch tomorrow, would we launch it as is? That means, is the scope good? Is the title good? Is the description good? Is the community there? If there's just something fundamentally wrong with it, we want to fix it at 45% instead of waiting till after it reaches 100% and everybody's waiting for the site to appear. So.
And our apologies, because we have done that in the past, where
Yes.
something got to 100%, we're like, whoa.
You look at a proposal and it's ready to go, and you start thinking about it not in abstract terms, but in reality, and you say, we cannot launch a site like that. It never occurred to me, but this is foolish for one reason or another. But what happens up until the point where the proposal reaches 45%, we now have a meta site attached to Area 51. So there's a lot of discussion going on and a lot of challenges.
Let's do the URL discuss.area51. And that's also linked at the top. If you go to area51.stackexchange.com and click the discuss link at the top, where else can people get to that? From the proposal? Yeah, create new discussion.
From every proposal. Yeah, we've done a lot. I mean, anyone who hasn't been to Area 51 in a while, it's worth visiting again, because the first thing we did is we've categorized all these proposals so that you can really focus a little bit more on things you might be interested in. And from every proposal, you can link specific discussions to the creation of that proposal. And if you're really just more interested in Stack Exchange in general, you can go to the discussion section, which is the conglomerate of all the discussions that are going on for each proposal. But when it hits that 45%, we can now really take a close look at how those discussions progressed and decide, are there any real issues here we need to address? And they're usually things like, scope is really hard. We're still struggling with, how to scope a site. Do we need mergers? Do we need, if the proposal is just taking too long, do we need to get other proposals merged into it just to, say, these are great ideas, but there's too many, niche factions trying to create this subject. Let's get these people together and create a stronger site. But scoping is certainly probably one of the hardest problems that I don't think we've solved yet, is exactly how to scope a site.
And then, so once something makes it to 100%, which I think movies is the most recent one, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You guys do a lot of work around that initial private beta. It used to be a 7-day period, but it's kind of like morphed a little bit into an N-day period.
Yeah, we're trying to
do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, we're trying to get back to the 7-day period and 14 on the top end, because what we found is if it really takes more than 2 weeks to sort of meet those minimum requirements of what gets a site out of private beta, there's just a really strong correlation that there's something fundamentally wrong with the site. So we try not to let them just drag on forever, just for the sole purpose of accumulating all the questions. And the reason we have this private beta is to make sure the site opens up on day one with basically a full page of questions, and plus that, we want more than a full page, so that you don't have that empty restaurant syndrome. But in addition to that, we want to make sure that there's a governance forming, that there's core users emerging that are sort of going to close questions and take care of the site and have meta discussions. And a lot of times we get users who, they commit to a proposal, they may even show up, but they're just not the right group to sort of create that site. And the site just sort of meanders in its scope, and they haven't decided, what the site's about, or they fundamentally disagree, or there was a lot of miscommunication in the proposal process. And it's better just to close those sites down in private beta than to sort of let them go public and let a bunch of users come in and just start using it and just really compounding the problems.
Well, right, failure, well, I don't want, failure's not their word, but lack of leadership compounds, right? There's not leaders that are going to magically emerge later if there's no early leadership on the site. And this is why also we started early on deciding that every site that launches, even in private beta, has to have a meta where the leadership issues can get worked out. How does the site work? why are we doing this, how are we doing this, all that stuff gets moved over to the site's meta. And that's where you guys spend a lot of time, isn't that right, Rebecca, on the private betas?
Right. It's a lot of just trying to educate the users and make sure that they're getting off on the right foot. Because if you can take care of these issues early on, it's just going to benefit everyone down the road.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've certainly seen that on a lot of sites where they unconsciously adopt sort of bad habits. And those bad habits, and we've seen that on Stack Overflow. We made a lot of mistakes early on by allowing sort of the egregiously fun questions. I mean, some fun is allowed, but stuff that was really off topic that we didn't know until later. And then it was like part of the fabric of the site. And then there was a bunch of people complaining because, like, well, this is the way we've always done it. You know, even though the way you've always done it doesn't really work. And just we've always done it this way is kind of a bad reason to do anything in life. It's like you should be constantly reevaluating, like, why are we doing this? What is this for? Just because we've always done it this way doesn't actually mean that's a good thing, right? But, yeah, earlier the better, because the way I view this is what I call the Stack Exchange cake recipe. And I really don't like it when communities repeat the same mistakes that we made earlier on. I feel like that's our failure to reach in and help them figure that stuff out a little bit earlier than we did, so they don't have to, repeat mistakes. I'm a fan of all new mistakes, new, exciting, never before seen mistakes.
We have to get in there.
Yesterday. What was that? Go on, carry on. I'll try to remember my mistake.
I think one of our most important roles, the fundamental thing that we do the most is where we have to get into these early betas, and exactly what Jeff just said, that we have a lot of hard-earned lessons that we had years to work out over Stack Overflow, and these sites don't have years to sort of relearn those same things. So it gets really difficult sometimes to go in and shut down specific behaviors that on the surface or when the site is very young look completely harmless. And you have to instill on those communities just exactly, you have to say, like, fast forward, here's where this is going to be a problem. And hopefully you can convince them quick enough before they sort of start heading down that road.
And the only thing I'll add to that is there are some unique elements to some communities. Like, one thing that gaming really struggles with is the tagging issues that they have, because every top-level game ever created from Pong onward is a tag. And it's just unavoidable. The topic matter kind of dictates this, right? It's not wrong to say that. But that leads to a lot of other issues in the tagging system that are really hard to figure out. And it's really just something about the topic. It's not like they're actually doing anything wrong. I think there's ways you can sort of ameliorate that and work around it, that they have to be sort of a little extra disciplined in the way that they tag. But we have seen certain communities sort of have some unique needs. Like, I acknowledge that. Like, we're also evolving the engine. We're not saying, okay, this is the engine, this is the way it works. We're sort of poking the boundaries of the engine out a little bit in certain areas. But we have to map the engine to the topic. It's not the other way around. It's not like because we have this new topic, we're going to change the way everything works, because, we have our cake recipe. We can't change it to, a turkey recipe. It's a cake. But you can obviously have lots of different kinds of cakes. That's perfectly valid. So I think that's also another thing that I enjoyed, and I think you guys participate and help in a lot, is like figuring out the unique elements of these communities, that do have some other needs. Like, I know I was kind of sad Game of Go got closed, because I know Ben wrote a really cool JavaScript board parser.
Yeah.
That is up on the board site now.
Yeah. What's nice about that sort of shutdown is that we did get enough of a community to sort of bring them to one of our existing sites, and they do seem perfectly happy to enhance one of our existing sites. I would love to see a lot more of that in our network, where a shutdown or a reboot or whatever we want to call it isn't like a death sentence. That maybe this is somehow in the future a more iterative process, where it's like, you guys didn't get it quite right, but you're welcome to try again in this different format.
Well, a good example of that, I think, is the atheism site, which was really not working. But we brought a lot of good users to Skeptics. Like, some really, really smart, really intelligent users came over to Skeptics, and I was very proud of that. Like you said, we didn't throw everything away. First, it's Creative Commons, so nothing's ever lost. And B, you get some really smart users that again, it's our job to educate them and sort of find the users that are leaders and sort of teach them the Stack Exchange way. I mean, I liken this to really being a religion. Like, this is, you don't change the world by creating a product, you change the world by founding a religion, and you're basically teaching people the tenets of this religion. It's that, it's information first, and, the thing that's sacred is this idea that we're creating these artifacts that are going to move this topic forward in the world, not just, on the internet, but in the world in some small way. And the users who believe in that are really your best allies to making that happen. And retaining those kind of users is, I think, a huge measure of success. So it's always exciting to hear that.
Right. Bringing that back around to, when do you shut down a site? It's really interesting. Like, you agonize over these decisions, and sometimes just asking them in Meta, is it time to shut this down? Sometimes you just get that sense of total apathy, and something we agonized over when we shut them down, it's barely a whisper. Compared to other communities who are just like, oh, wait a minute, you completely misunderstand why this is so valuable. And I've actually gone back a few times and said, ooh, maybe this isn't a shutdown situation because we do have some things we can work on.
What were the sites we actually shut down? I'm trying to make a list. Atheism.
We got Gadgets, which was one of our early examples.
Right.
AI, Atheism, Freelancers.
Freelancers, I don't even remember that one.
That was the one, they were a bunch of people asking, how do I find work?
Yeah.
And that's why we shut them down, because after that it was hard to see where they were going.
One question.
There was Go, and recently CGI, our 3D graphics site. Guitars, that
was merchant in music, though. That's a good example.
But that's a good example of, it's a good subject, just sort of gone bad. We didn't pick the right scope. So we made good on that community. The same with the CGI site. We had to shut that down because it's a good subject. It probably could have worked as is.
It may work again in the future.
It may work again, and that's the idea. We told them explicitly, we said, we're shutting you down, but we don't want you to consider this a shutdown. We want a reboot. So please, number one thing you guys should do is go back and create the proposal.
We shut down How Things Work. That's a good example somebody brought up in the chat room. Every one of these tells a different story as to why we shut it down. We shut down Atheism because they ran out of questions. We shut down Gadgets because there was no overlap between the people asking the questions and the people that had the answers, because everybody has a different set of gadgets. Yeah. We shut down AI because there were no real AI workers on the site at all. There was nobody on there that was actually working in AI or knew anything about AI. So the questions were all like, what do AI researchers wear? Not really AI questions. Freelancers again just became whining about getting jobs. Mm-hmm. And the other ones were just kind of small. How Things Work we shut down because it was turning into a cut and paste things from other places on the internet and make an inferior page. So it was all like, how does a pencil work? Well, according to Wikipedia, and then the whole thing then cribbed.
Yeah. And I do have a list of the sites that we closed and sort of the lessons learned from that. And the idea of this cake recipe that Jeff mentioned was, the newer sites we create are actually at quite an advantage because we learn from all these sort of missteps, and we can identify these problems, and hopefully we're just not repeating them. So, it's useful to sort of...
Mostly not. Sometimes I see things on Area 51 that make me cringe, and I'm like, oh no, they're about to repeat that.
Yeah.
And we did make a big change in Area 51, which was having close reasons on the questions. So the questions, rather than... The original goal of the questions on Area 51 was to describe the boundary of the topic, what's on topic and what's off topic. What we're seeing is we would see a site fail, and we'd go look at what happened on Area 51, and we'd be like, oh yeah, no wonder it failed. It's the same as Area 51. There's nothing good here. And the real reason is that we didn't have enough close reasons on Area 51, enough ways to say, this is not a good example question because this would not be allowed on the site because this is a shopping question or this is conversation or this is whatever. So we now have on Area 51 all the same close reasons for sample questions as we do on the site itself. The trouble is that that's taking a while to work its way through the system. So we still have sites coming up and getting created that had their sample questions developed long before.
Yeah, we're looking at Area 51, and as much as we possibly can until we get to sort of a second generation product is go back and try and simulate the actual experience of using a Stack Exchange site. So, while we had this sort of crazy idea of, vote is on topic, vote is off topic, it said, why don't we just use the same interface that our users of Stack Exchange have become accustomed to? And like I said, anyone who hasn't been in Area 51 in a while, you really should check it out because you can go in and there's comments on example questions, and you can vote to close them, vote to reopen them, and we really want to create that same environment of a Stack Exchange site that sort of guarantees the questions are of good quality. We haven't instilled that behavior in Area 51 yet, but the top example and on and off example questions usually aren't that great. And
they're usually very broad.
Yeah, and I think if the users went in and sort of jealously guarded, saying these aren't good enough to launch our site, we would actually get a definition phase that was actually usable on the real site.
Here's a question from the chat room. Wouldn't it be simpler just to create a catch-all site, answers.stackexchange.com, and split off topics as they grow large enough for their own sites? So, why don't we just make, Quora, and then when anything got big, then it would get its own site.
Well, that's gadgets in a nutshell. You won't have a community because these people have nothing in common. Why would they go there?
Yeah.
I mean, that's like saying let's just create gadgets again. That would be repeating the same mistake.
It's much bigger. Yeah.
And I think also you turn the appearance of the site into more like a chat room than what we call a quality Q&A, and users are just going to imitate what they see.
Right.
So the chances of generating we call it Yahoo Answers. I mean, that's, really what they're talking about is something where you can ask
Yahoo
anything.
Calls it that too.
Well, yeah.
That's the name of the site.
Yes.
Yes.
But the chances of creating a good, let's say, what's one of our sites, DIY site, out of that is so remote because the site itself isn't being conducted well. You're breaking your own philosophy and saying let's cherry pick the good topics, but you're not going to get a good quality community out of it because it's being used as a chat site.
Well, one thing I do want to mention is one way this can work. It's not quite what the questioner was describing, but like on Stack Overflow, the divide between Stack Overflow and programmers. Because to me, there were a lot of questions that were not really bad questions. They were just soft questions, softer than like, okay, here's my code. I don't understand why this isn't working. Help me out. It was like I have this issue with some algorithm trying to design. It was much more abstract, and it was what I call a whiteboarding problem versus a compiler problem. And you can take things that are sort of just marginally off topic that aren't quite working but should work. You recognize the kernel of something useful and good in the question. That can become a new site. But just to say somebody asked a question about how to install hardwood flooring on Stack Overflow, so therefore we're going to create a DIY site. I mean, that's crazy, right? You can peel off, I think, this only works on very large sites, by the way. Like, I don't think even Serverfault or Superuser could probably support this, but on enormous sites, you could say there's this class of questions that's kind of working but not quite, but that could probably make another site. And that was kind of the genesis of programmers, which I think, it certainly has challenges because it has a lot of soft questions, but I think it's very popular and it's generally working. It takes really good moderators. So that brings me to our next topic of really good moderation, which a site like Programmers needs. That
actually, by the way, that takes us full circle because the fact that we have 260 moderators on this network shows that we're not really spreading ourselves too thin. I mean, that answers Matt Cutz's question of how can are you spreading yourself too thin? Well, no, we built a two-tier system, essentially. It doesn't require me to go into a site for it to be moderated and for it to be good.
Right. Well, certainly the users can do it. That's what the reputation system is about. But also there's this process, and I think maybe Rebecca is a good person to talk about this, of how do you identify sort of leadership sort of because we start doing that. When do we start doing that, Rebecca? Like beginning of public beta?
Yeah, a couple weeks into the public beta. And we just look for people who they're participating on meta, so they're showing, that they don't just care about answering stuff, but they want to see the site grow into something big and something that has good quality. We look for people who are editing to improve the content, who are voting to close, just other activities besides just asking and answering questions.
Right. And just as an aside, like John Skeet, when we were first doing moderators, people were like, well, obviously John Skeet has to be a moderator.
Nope.
But John Skeet himself has said, no, I don't actually want to be a moderator. Which is really
he wants to answer
true.
Questions.
Like you don't necessarily want your high rep users to be moderators. That's one of the fallacies. That's one of the sort of flaws in our election system that we're trying to fix. Is that they tend to elect the people with the highest rep.
That's like asking your grandparents to be ushers at your wedding.
Because they're
the high rep users. They sit in the front row. They're not ushers.
Yes, the oldest people must be the wisest, right?
I think it's worse than that, though, because if you have your high rep users who by having high rep are clearly the ones with the most knowledge, and you're saying, no, go spend time on like cleaning up the site, you're harming the site because that's less time that they can spend answering questions and putting on knowledge.
Different things. Yeah, very, very different.
Yeah, so and Rebecca, do you want to talk about how we refined the last election pass to help deal with that?
So for the Stack Overflow election, we just, previously all you needed was a little bit of rep, and you could toss your name in and nominate yourself. But that didn't necessarily mean that you were doing the activities that you'd be asked to do as a moderator. So we just looked, if you had some of the badges that indicated you cared about doing those things. Because if you haven't been doing them, becoming a moderator doesn't mean you're magically going to start.
Oh boy, yeah, that is a common theme that I've seen in so many things. I mean, that's the theme from Area 51, right? Like, the theme from Area 51 is if you haven't been on the internet asking questions and getting answers to questions by typing into the internet, you are unlikely to actually do that. And that's why if you vote to commit to a site and you actually participate in sites, you have a much higher, your vote is counted for much more because you're much more likely to actually show up and do that. And similarly, like the Chaos team, I mean, it's just sort of this recurring theme. The Chaos team, when they go out to try to recruit people for new sites and get them excited, they're always trying to figure out ways of getting people that are on the internet typing. Maybe they're blogging, maybe they're not typing into a Q&A site, but they're on the internet. They're on Google+, they're on Twitter, they're doing that. Because to go and get somebody who's an expert on personal productivity who has a TV show and is never on the internet, it requires such a major change of behavior. It's just unlikely to happen.
Right. So just asking users, prove to us that you're interested in doing this first.
Yeah.
And if you're curious about the election process, if you go to the About page of any site in our network, /About, it's linked at the top most of the time unless you have a lot of rep. Scroll down the bottom, you can see the moderators, and then there's also links to the election where they were elected. Now, what Rebecca's talking about, though, is there's two things. There's selecting pro tem moderators, which is appointments. And then we have to decide if a community is large enough to hold an election. Rebecca, do you want to talk about how? Because I know you put a lot of thought into that.
So some of the things we look at is how big is the community. I mean, if there's not a core group of users that are continually coming back, that's a little worrisome for us. We also look at the distribution of rep that the users have. We want to make sure that there's a good middle class. There's users with high rep. Because if everyone's a new user, that doesn't show that it's a cohesive community that necessarily cares about moving the site forward. So we definitely look for things like that. We also look at how active the meta site is, which again, it's just, how much is the community coming together and working together to grow the site. So everything we look at ties back to,
Did we eventually have, what was the last election we had that wasn't Stack Overflow?
Let's see, we've got Android going on now.
Oh, nice. Android. Oh.
I don't remember.
And that was one of those communities that took a while to sort of get the right kind of critical mass. Because holding an election, which doesn't work, is kind of a bummer.
It's embarrassing.
Well, it's a bummer for everybody. It's not just for us. I mean, it's a bummer for the community. It's like, wow, we tried to have government and failed, right? Like, that's depressing. So we try to make sure we only do this when we're fairly sure the election is going to work. And this is something that Rebecca, I know in particular, has done a ton of work around. And we came close with our first pass of making this mistake, really close. And we wanted to make sure that we didn't because it's just, depressing. And then, so Rebecca, let's talk about, so once the pro tem moderators are appointed or elected, there's also this process that you guys use to sort of work with the moderators to sort of help them understand our engine and, how does that work? There's regular meetings for the moderators, isn't that right?
Right. So every couple of weeks we hold chatcasts with moderators. Sometimes we'll have topics where there's things that we want to bring to the community, but it's just about trying to open a channel between the community team and the moderators so that if there are issues that we need to deal with, we can figure out what those are, figure out if there's pain points. And again, just trying to educate the moderators, just like we're trying to educate users on a new site.
And to some extent, they're also educating us, right? Like, because I love the way that new sites, they'll sort of revisit things that we've forgotten or that we forgot to question. They're continually questioning things, and that's good. Like, I actually enjoy that. I find that a lot of the smaller sites on the network sometimes come up with the more interesting issues in the engine because they're looking at these nooks and crannies that the other more mature sites have just gotten used to.
These are always evolving.
Yeah, so it is a two-way channel, for sure. I want to be clear about that. And then also, you guys have, for people that can't come to the chatcast, there's like a moderator newsletter, isn't that right?
Correct. We send that out monthly, just quick highlights of very important announcements that they all need to know.
Yeah, we have a lot of scattered places. We have Meta, we have chat, the moderator chat room. The idea of the newsletter was, if you're not that deeply involved in the inner workings of the site, here's the, 5 to 6 things you need to know. It's just a very terse sort of.
And anyone can view these, right? Isn't there a blog set up for them?
Yes, moderators.stackexchange.com.
So it's not like we're sending out
singular.
secret missives for the moderators to,
Correct. Yeah, it's out there for anyone to view.
That's right.
Huh? What happened? Did we run out of stuff to talk about?
No, I was trying to think. There was something else I wanted to bring up there.
You did mention, I don't know if I heard it mentioned, but that we want to make sure that communities are more informed and not just electing the top moderators. And Rebecca spends a lot of time. The top users, I'm sorry. Rebecca spends a lot of time on some of these town hall sessions to make sure there's just much more information available to the users to really select their governance so that the site gets off to a stronger start.
That's true. We do have the town halls during the election phase, which are very cool. And Rebecca does a great job of sort of summarizing those and capturing that on Meta. So if you're curious about that, not only go to, /about, click on the election, but also go to the Meta and look at the election tag. And usually there's a summary of the town hall. Rebecca does a great job of capturing that there. Oh, I remember what I want to mention. So Robert brought up a point of, where do you have to look as a moderator? Say you're a moderator on Personal Productivity, Joel's favorite site. Where do you have to look to see what's going on? Well, a couple things we do. One at the engine level is every time there's a new meta question, if you're a moderator, that goes in your universal notifications. So as a moderator on that site, and Joel, you and I would never see this, but it's worth mentioning.
Yes.
Every single meta question goes into your...
Because you've got to look at it.
Global notification. You really should be, because we found that sometimes moderators weren't looking at the meta. Well, that's not good. So we sort of nudge them along by inserting every meta question that gets asked into their notification queue so they cannot not know.
Which is not a lot. I mean, it's not like it's noisy.
Not. On most sites, yeah, it's fine. But the other place they might need to look, and this is why we have the newsletters and the town halls, is Meta Stack Overflow, because there's this concept of state government, which is the site, and then there's the concept of national government, which is the Stack Exchange engine itself. And we do have both of those levels. And sometimes we make decisions at the national level, and we try to make decisions that work for a lot of the states, right? Like the way I evaluated some of these decisions was how many sites will benefit from this change. If the answer is 1, then, well, that's not really a great reason to make this change to the engine. If the answer is 5, 6, 7, all of them, then that's a great reason to do this. So if you want to lobby for some changes that benefit your site, sometimes you have to lobby at the national level. We will migrate stuff from the local meta, from the state government, to Meta Stack Overflow, which is sort of the national government. Not all the time, and one misconception we had, and I know Rebecca brought this up, and it's a very good point, is that you don't have to go to the national government. You can just spend most of your time on your local government and not care what's going on Meta Stack Overflow. But that's what the newsletters are for, is to keep you appraised of anything that's changing at the national level that might affect you.
There is sort of a lot of what seems like stupid duplication, which is sort of the equivalent, to continue Jeff's metaphor, of having 50 Department of Motor Vehicles that all have slightly different procedures for getting a driver's license. And that seems kind of like a waste of time. Can't we just have that at the national level? And so it's similarly like, people will show up in the metas for all 70 sites and ask questions about voting and closing and off-topic and why is this off-topic and why, and stuff that's generic to the site, and then they sort of feel like, should I be asking this at the federal level? Should I go to meta.stack overflow? And I think, one of the benefits of having all that stuff, even though it's super repetitive, having it happen in that community, is that that community becomes a self-sufficient place, not just a piece of the larger.
Right.
Well, it's also a community-building exercise because they want to feel like they have their own governance, and they're not just being spoon-fed, the Stack Exchange line. They don't want the cookie-cutter site. So just because they're going to argue about the same meta tags that every other site argues about. They had that argument, and
they came up to their own decision, and they had their autonomy, and that gives them a feeling of like ownership, and
yes,
and it matters, and it also creates activity on the meta site, which in turn creates a healthy site by saying there's people here that care about this site.
Right. Yeah, and you don't want people really going in there and saying, "Oh, we already talked about this. We shouldn't be discussing these." You do want that extra activity wherever you can get it.
And sometimes they bring a new perspective. I mean, you're right. Sometimes it's the same question that's been asked 50 times, but this is what our engine is really good at: is taking a really simple question that's probably a duplicate and answering it really rapidly and giving somebody a reputation for it. Now, on metas, there isn't any reps. That's a non-issue on the meta, but I don't mind, when I used to go through and do a lot of this, I don't do it anymore, but answering these little simple questions takes 20 seconds. I just type, paste. I'm like, okay, here's how it works.
Yep.
And they got a personal answer from, one of the co-founders of the company.
Yep.
Wow. That's kind of awesome, right?
There's also there's also a lot of common fallacies that when the site goes through and asks the questions and they give the wrong answers, and then users jump in and saying, well, no, listen, this is really the truth here. They learn from that experience, by going through it themselves rather than just being fed the doctrine saying this is the way it is. We decided that 2 years ago, and this is how it's going to be. Is sort of going through that process in meta.
Yeah, and some of the metas can be pretty feisty, and that's good. I like active metas. I like, a little bit of argument on the meta because it means people give a crap, right?
Yep.
I mean, they should push for the things that they want.
Yep.
And it's, it's always a negotiation, but that's a sign of life. And when you go in and, like you said, when you post something like we're closing down the site and everybody's like meh,
yeah,
that's bad.
At least you don't feel bad about it.
Yeah.
And to bring it full circle back to the topic of the site that I closed down a long time ago, and the people just would not go away. The fact they don't care that you're closing down the site means that there weren't really bonds being formed there. That people don't really care about one another. We're not being a transport mechanism or a communications mechanism for a group of people that want to communicate amongst one another. We're just sort of a place on the internet where people are typing, and that's not enough, essentially.
Yep.
To justify a site. Okay. Well, that is Stack Exchange podcast number 30.
Well, that was good. And like I said, the reason this is important is, A, because it's important, period, but also because I was a little offended by, and Matt Kuntz meant well. I know he wasn't trying to piss me off, but we do a ton of work to make
our sites awesome.
To ensure that we're doing the right thing at all times. And really the only failing is maybe we're just not talking about it enough. Maybe we should be more public about this so more people realize that this stuff goes on.
Yeah.
To the extent that people don't know about this, then that's our. We
have a very interesting infographic planned. I don't want to tip my hat to that one, but that's going to be cool.
Okay. All right.
It's going to be very, very cool.
It sounds awesome.
It will draw attention to the fact that we hate bad stuff.
Yes. And in our defense, I do look at pretty much all the sites that get created at some point, and I rarely see things that give me pause. That are like, wow, I am ashamed to be associated with this content. I mean, it happens every now and then. But in general, the engine does a really good job of, we do a great job of educating people, and the engine itself does a good job of sort of addressing some of the common internet problems. Like math has always been a really natural melding to our topic, and one of the things they brought up on their meta was the engine's amazing resistance to cranks, which is a huge problem in the math community. It's ruined. Math on Usenet is completely gone because of all the cranks. People that are
two people.
1 equals 2, and just crazy
squaring
stuff.
The circle. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're like, this is a complete non-issue in Stack Exchange. It just doesn't happen. Period.
What did that? I was about to say something like unbelievably brilliant and witty and. Not to mention that we have a 98% answer rate. I mean, quality schmality. Nobody else even comes close to us in terms of the number of questions that get answered. Nobody else. Other sites would kill for 20% of their questions getting answers of any form, of any way, shape, or form. That's that is something that nobody else has cracked. So we've gone so far above and beyond in terms of just getting ridiculously high. You get something happens.
And we're not afraid to be strict about this stuff, and not in a mean way. I mean, Joel is always very protective, in a nice way. There are rules in the household, right?
Yeah.
When you enter the threshold of the doorway, there's certain rules you agree to when you come into our house, and they're not onerous, but that's what makes it work. So,
Sweet. Okay. This concludes the podcast. Your guests have been Robert Cartaino, who is community head of the community team here at the Stack Exchange, and you'll see him all over the network. I don't even have to provide a place for you to go find Robert or Rebecca.
Yeah, they're doing their jobs, they should be pretty present.
They're omnipresent.
This is true.
Along with the rest of the community team who have not been participating here, Grace Note and Shog 9. And who did I forget?
And Arthi.
Arthi, with 2 A's. And it's sort of getting towards the end of the year and the holidays, so we don't have any further podcast planned for this year, but we might surprise you.
You never know.
You never know. Things happen. Things appear and disappear on short notice. So I won't say see you next week, but we'll see you next year probably.
Yep. See you next year.